along with Daniel Dietrich.
Hey.
We're really glad to have you. If you're hearing that little sound there, you know that if you've been listening to the podcast, this is nothing new to you. But if you're new to the live stream, we've now been adding this into the live stream. Just a little reminder that we do both a podcast and a live stream of the same conversation. So you're welcome to pick it up wherever you can find it. I am in Minneapolis, Minnesota, standing up today. I'm committed all week. I'm taking a stand all week. I'm going to spend this hour taking care of myself, standing up. Let us know in the comments if you're watching on the live stream where you are, or shoot us an email over at podcast@vocommongood.com. You know, if you're so into this podcast, you would stop whatever you're doing, write us an email. That's awesome. And put a nice little header in there, nice little subject lines, you know, something encouraging. Because I often get letters soliciting my behavior in some political way that are awfully dire. One came this morning that said, "Goodbye, Doug. I'm sorry to say this." Subject line, like the thing that shows up, sent a panic through me. And it was like, you haven't yet responded to why we should stop Jim Jordan from being a congressman from Ohio, and we need you right now. And I mean, it was just like, wow, they have really, really dug in. So don't send us one of those. Send us a really nice one. And you can send it to me. You could address it today to Dan Dietrich. We're talking news roundup today. Dan, good morning. And where do you find yourself on this fine day? Great.
Oh, it is a lovely day in South Bend, Indiana. I'm here in the studio off the back of my garage, and it's definitely spring and not summer, as you said before the show, because, man, last night it got super cold and I forgot to leave the heater on in here, so I'm like bundled up below the waist. I've got blankets and space heaters
and
trying to keep warm.
Chattery jaw, if that happens, if you just get shot with a shiver. Hey, it also might feel a little early to you because daylight savings time has now kicked in. Because if we're not going to do anything in this country, we're going to save daylight. It's been 100-year project of I don't know, I guess Western civilization. I'm not sure if every country in the world has been doing it for this long, but I know that Germany and then France and England in World War I started this little project to change our clocks in order to save oil and energy during the war. So if you've ever felt like you want to be done with saving daylight and making time changes, you know, every 4 months or 8 months or whatever the rhythm is now for this, and you need a deep rationale for why you don't like it, say it was just a big ploy to make people more efficient at war, and I'm against war. Because that's really where it came from. Some people joke or think that it was Abraham Lincoln, that it was Benjamin Franklin who pitched this idea. Apparently back in the late 1700s he did, but it was as a joke to people in France to say you could burn less candles if you changed your clocks. Then, I don't know, something like that.
And then we're like, hey, that's not a bad idea. Let's actually do that.
That's the post office guy, right? Let's stick with him. But apparently this is something that has been part of saving fuel and energy, which now, if you are into any of the let's stop the nonsense around daylight savings time, which doesn't really have the flavor of stop the steal. We need to get a little sharper branding on this. There are lots of people who've studied this, and they know a few things. And one of the things they know is it doesn't save any electricity. It just makes people nutty. And it makes kids awfully tired for this whole week. It's like you did a little jet lag. I mean, those poor little sweeties in my neighborhood. I heard that bus roll up at 7:15 this morning outside of my house picking up neighborhood kids. And, man, that's like those kids getting picked up at 6:15, which just makes them miserable all week long.
Yeah, we just got used to taking my kids to school while there's daylight, and then to go back, it just feels like a real gut punch.
Yeah, because we won't spend all day talking about this, but the thing about it is the days already get longer where I live here in Minnesota, way up north, and presumably where you are too in Indiana. It gets the days are already getting longer because of the tilt of the earth, right? And as we get more into summer, the sun is higher in the sky and stays in the sky longer. So the nights already get longer. And then we add to it. But I'll tell you, last night when it was 7:15 p.m. here in Minneapolis and it was still light in the sky, I thought daylight savings time is the greatest thing in the world. What I want it bright in the morning and I want it bright at night. Basically, I want to, live on another planet. where those things are possible. But Dan, as we were talking about at the start of this, not every state has always played along well with the daylight savings time. I mean, you're in one of those states that I was confused about even until recently, whether Indiana saw itself playing along with daylight savings time or was like Alaska and Hawaii and said, Arizona and Hawaii and said, we're not playing along with the with daylight savings time. We're not.
Yeah, we were longtime holdouts against daylight savings. We hated daylight, apparently. It wasn't until 2006 that we became the 48th state to adopt daylight savings. And this was really confusing because growing up, I lived in Michigan, just across the border, Indiana-Michigan border. And so half the year, if you were going to the mall down in South Bend, where I live now, you didn't know, is it the same time? Is it an hour off? Where are we? It was always confusing. There was never a time it was not confusing. And then 2006, they finally joined the club and changed times with everybody else.
And unfortunately for the good people in Indiana, about that same time, a number of state legislatures around the country have said, we're going to go away from it. We're just going to pick one or the other, and we're going to lock it in. And they're going to the movement in California, Florida, and other places is to lock in the daylight savings time version, the one that we're on right now, where we've changed our clocks away from Greenwich Mean Time. And I just have that Chicago song running through my head from the 1970s with the lyrics, does anybody really know what time it is? And does
anyone really care?
Really care? Well, not really, other than the fact that, you get that little panicky thing when you forgot to change your car clock, or that one clock in your house, and you look and all of a sudden you realize I feel time confused as to what time. And you wouldn't think an hour is a big deal. There was a pitch back in the early 1800s, 1900s, somewhere in there, a couple of times, where they wanted to change clocks. Like this was something that came up and then was put into place in 1908, 1916, 1917, around war savings. But one of the ideas was that every month you would change the clock by 20 minutes. That was one set of ideas.
Oh gosh!
Can you imagine getting off of the hour rhythm and be like, is it 10 a.m. or is it 10:20? Oh, we moved it ahead because they wanted to sort of incrementally keep up with the sun's movement. All of that.
But even that would never do it because the length of the days changes.
Let's stop messing with the sun and just keep time. Just keep time the way it is. Hey, if you're in the chat, let us know what you think about daylight savings time, of course. But many more important things happening in our news that matter to us around here at Vote Common Good, where we like to talk about things that are happening in our world, what we can do about it, how we can be engaged, and how we can, play on words coming here, let our light shine like daylight savings time into all the evenings. It's big news here in Minneapolis and also all around the world that the murder trial, the trial around the murder of George Floyd, is happening today. The Derek Chauvin case. And it's hard to even know how to talk about it, right? Because it's Derek Chauvin, who was the officer who put his knee on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, causing his death, in my opinion, in reckless disregard for human life and abuse of power and an act of murder, as I see it. But do you call this trial the Chauvin murder trial because he's the one on trial, or do you relate it to the victim of the murder, which is George Floyd? And people don't know how to do this. The press doesn't know. They don't know here. I think around here on this podcast in the Vote Common Good world, we're going to refer to it as the George Floyd murder trial, because I think we need to remember that what this is all about was not only the murder of George Floyd, but the murder of so many other people at the hands of the police, and the overextension of our government's actions in causing death, and abusing the very power that we say in our society is supposed to protect people. That at least on the side of many of the police cars here in the area that I live, and when I was a kid, I think all of them, the motto was to protect and to serve. And many people don't feel like that the police are intending to protect and serve the community. They wonder very deeply if they're there to protect and serve anything other than their own commitment and their thin blue line and themselves. So this is what's rich in our society, has been since the start of our civilization. how authority is dealt with for individuals, but particularly in the United States, it has a very brutal and deadly consequence to it. And we're going to be talking about it around here, and we think that we should. I was leaving a pause for you there, Dan, but go ahead. If you don't have any.
I've got nothing much to add. I'm hopeful that justice will happen, but not holding my breath. I think the justice system has been designed in such a way that we are continually disappointed in how these cases unfold, and I'm hopeful, but not expecting anything close to justice.
I mean, this is the thing. The headline that's up on the live stream feed here is one from the Washington Post, which says hints of the strategy and new revelations in the first week of the Derek Chauvin murder trial. That's how they're choosing to refer to it. It's also we call the George Floyd murder trial, the murder of George Floyd trial. Look, when jury selection gives hints toward keen observers about what the defense team and the prosecution are going to do with their defense and prosecution, when you can tell how they're going to move forward by the questions they're asking jurors, that's a reminder to us that our actual legal system, the system that we have operating in this country to use the force and power of government to inflict a penalty on a person, that is its own system. And there's another part of our common sense and what a lot of us would call for the common good that doesn't always comport with and fit well with what actually is the demand inside the legal system. Now, our legal system has certain protections built into it that are extraordinarily important, and we should be thinking about those on a regular basis. It also has some biases in it, and those biases often don't treat everyone equally and fair. So what we're dealing with in every trial of every kind, civil trials, criminal trials, is that the system of adjudication is not always the same thing as what many of us think ought to happen. Right? That was certainly clear in, what things that were going on with the Trump administration. A lot of us saw that at that level, but you're also going to see it in this trial. And this is where I get really concerned, because I was on a jury trial, and it was a very aggressive assault case, and it was multiple days long. It was long and complicated with police reports and victim testimonies. And then we had 4 days of deliberation as a jury. And when we came back with our verdict, the judge said to us, it was a guilty verdict, and the judge said to us, I want to thank, after everything was all done, he said, hey, I normally don't do this, and I don't always do this. I just want to thank you as jurors for making what I believe was the right determination here, and told us why this was going to be beneficial even to the person who was found guilty. And he said, I thought that you all would conclude what we call man on the street justice, what made sense to you. I appreciate that you followed the rules that you were given for the jury trial, which we all ended up feeling good about at the end of it all. But what he was getting at was that this case felt like, when you first heard it, that it had a sense of what an ordinary person would do, what they would think, how they would respond, how they would act. That was not precisely what the law demanded the verdict include. And that mismatch between what the judge said at the time was common man on the street, his choice of words, common man on the street justice, versus the legal requirement, those two don't always match. And it's that disparity that so many of us are crying out for and calling out for to be more equal. So that very well could be at play in whatever the verdict is that comes out. And so some of us have been following this very closely, right? Whether it's going to be manslaughter, whether it's going to be third-degree murder, second-degree murder, like all of these titles have a very specific legal criteria to be met. And that is different than what a person would say, was this right or wrong? Was this an act that caused a person's death? Is it what you would call murder? Did he kill the man? Those realities, that moral outcry, is not just what's carried into the judicial system. It gets very particular, gets very specific, and the demands become very demanding for what a juror is going to decide. So it's a very precarious and difficult place that jurors find themselves in, having to separate out sometimes their own sense of goodness, justice, morality, right and wrong, from the legal demands. And that is going to continue to come up. And we don't have a lot of ways in our society to talk about this. Certainly not to rectify the places where the judicial system doesn't match. This is one of the reasons why non-criminal penalties, or what are called civil charges, civil lawsuits, are brought against people. In fact,
because the criteria is less stringent than the like felony murder charges or whatever. You can more likely get a settlement in a civic case than justice in a third-degree murder trial or manslaughter case.
Totally. It's a big deal. And I'm telling you, and this is what's going to be coming, because sometimes in those civil cases, it can just be by a preponderance of the evidence or something, right? Or not all the jurors have to go along, only a majority. Like, it's a different standard. Well, the city of Minneapolis just agreed, the city council agreed to a $27 million payout to the George Floyd family for the behavior of this officer who killed him. Mm-hmm. So they made a moral and legal judgment as the city council about the city council's complicity in one of their officers behaving the way that he did. $27 million.
This is wrong, and it's wrong enough that we should pay this family $27 million. And yet, we'll see if he is convicted of any actual criminal charges.
See if it meets the standards for a person who's functioning in that role. And this is one of the big problems. The sworn police officers, whether on duty or off duty, are given a different criteria by which their behaviors are judged than individual citizens. Now, some of that makes a lot of sense, and some of it doesn't make sense. So this is what people have to wrestle with. This is why in the state of Minnesota, where this trial is going to take place, there's only been a few officers, and only in recent years, who've ever been held accountable for their actions at a legal level. A lot of payouts have gone out for their behavior from lawsuits, but not a lot have happened at the criminal level. So it's a really big deal. And this is something that in our society we have to address and have to talk about and have to relate to, because it's going to be a really big deal. And we're only at the moment of jury selection in this trial. And based on that headline, you can already see the headline saying hints of strategy and new revelations in first week of Derek Chauvin murder trial. You can see that this is now already starting to play out from the very beginning of what charges are brought, to what jurors are selected, to what arguments are made. All of that is a part of a very sophisticated and complex legal system, which is why a lot of people suggest that it's almost impossible for a person that doesn't have access to the highest level of representation to be able to navigate the legal system and all of its complexities, which is one of the great problems with our injustice in the justice system as far as individuals go. So this is what we're staring down as a society. I had a friend say to me yesterday, do you think the city will burn again if he's not found guilty? And yeah, I think it will. I think whether or not people act in ways that are similar to last summer, or they're just burning in their hearts and people are needing to express the frustration with this difference between what we know is right and wrong and what the judicial system allows us to execute as an act of justice when it comes to police officers. Man, I feel myself panicky just right now talking about it. It's these issues are undealt with in our society.
Right. And we have to remember, too, a lot of the standards that police officers are held to legally were written by the police unions. And so in cities and different places, the police union says this is the standard for misconduct that we're going to hold our officers to. You can't fire them without these certain criteria. And so in cities that are trying to weed out the bad apples, they'll fire officers for a long list of misconduct, and then the police union will say, no, you can't get rid of this guy.
Right.
You have to hire them
bring
back.
him back. Yep.
Yeah. It's just wild.
Just wild. And that's complicated, right? That is that even all of that is not easy to wrap your head around about whether they should have those protections or not. Sometimes injustice is plain, and sometimes injustice is buried inside of other complexities, and it's hard to get to it. It's hard to root it out because injustice can show up in all of these places for everyone, right? But especially for people that are perceived as the most vulnerable, or people who are without the resources and the access, either historically or financially, to push back. So that's happening in the news. Of course, that's going to be big stories in coming weeks. This same friend that I was talking to, he said, well, how long do you think the trial is going to be? And I said, well, he said, you don't think it'll be as long as the OJ trial, do you? Which sort of, I guess, dates us, the OJ trial from back in 94. And I'm like, no, that went on for like weeks or months. He's like, no, it was way longer than that. We had this little debate about how long the OJ trial was. Do you know how long the OJ trial was off the top of your head?
No. Felt like a year?
11 months.
Wow.
11 months. And I was trying to, I felt like I watched all of that, but I'm like, there's no way I watched it for 11. Like, what is in my memory from 30 years ago? So these trials can really go on. Now, I don't know that it'll be anything like that length of time, but that's a big deal as well. How many, what's being put on trial in this trial is going to be something that's going to be playing out and be very interesting. So that's big in the news, of course. Hey, another news piece, Stan, that I just got all excited about in the last couple of days. It turns out that the researchers around the vaccines that we have, specifically the Pfizer vaccine, but they believe this is true of all of them, the research that's been done on the vaccine's ability to stop transmission is now in. And they're saying, here's a quote from, and this comes from Dr. Peter Hodes, the dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at the Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. He says, it looks like, based on the study that was done in Israel, it looks like 90% reduction in asymptomatic transmission. And he says, and that's really good. Now, the article that I read goes on to even say, hey, look, and this I think is really important. This is Dr. Edgar Sanchez, the infectious disease physician at Orlando Health in Florida, said that the CDC's assumptions that vaccines will prevent transmission is really sound. And he notes, we had to do a lot of things previously with incomplete data during the pandemic, but we're getting more and more data that vaccines are dropping asymptomatic spread. So this is one of the parts, we talk about this a lot in the science editions on Friday, that one of the ways science works is that it wants to be very careful about its statements of confidence, right? It's never going to be certain, but it wants to be careful about how it postures its confidence. So while they could test very quickly the effect on the illness in an individual after they got the vaccine, they wanted to wait until they could test over time how that change in a person who's had the vaccine impacts the person's spreading of the virus. So they had to test that differently in different tests. And this caused many people, including me for a while, when I first heard these vaccines come out and heard the people very aggressively saying, and this was the scientists saying what they could be confident in saying, we don't know that it's going to impact the spread. We do know that it keeps you from getting sick. That created a notion in my head that got permanent, that became permanent in my head, right? Like, well, we still don't
There
know
was
that.
a lot of like, even after the vaccination, you're going to have to wear a mask. You're going to have to distance. At least initially, that was the messaging. And it was like, well, when do we get to go back to normal if we're all vaccinated? So,
Yeah.
there was some real frustration about that.
And they were saying, well, we don't know that yet. We don't know that yet. Great response, because it's true. Science should tell you the truth. That was true.
Mhm.
Now they know. But getting people to shift their mind from what they first heard and became the initial information. This is true about any communication. The first piece of information you give someone sits in a place in people's minds, in their imaginations and their explanations about the world, that's really
Hard to
different
dislodge.
than the new information, man. I mean, you can see why scientists are like, we just really want to be careful. Well, they were. Now, we all have to go around and say to people, yes, it's true that they were unsure when the vaccines were first approved about the effect that they would have on spreading the virus. They are now much more confident, to a point that this is all you're going to get out of a scientist. It stops the spread, right? It really does. And I read one little bit in this article, and we can put a link to it in the show notes and on the feed. But they said the reason it does is because it reduces the vaccine seems to reduce the amount of disease that's in your nasal passages and in your throat. So the disease is, your body responds to the disease. And what the vaccine does is causes your body to go into a response as if it has the disease without having the disease, which is the miraculous thing they do with vaccines. By the way, none of the vaccines give you the virus. They don't even give you a mutated version of the virus. Even the J&J, it's more traditional vaccine than the new mRNA one, but it doesn't give you the virus. That's not happening. It introduces a protein that is also present when the virus is present, and that protein is what your body responds to, not the virus. I just think this is super important. But we've talked a lot about COVID in the last couple of episodes, so we won't spend all day on it.
But what about the microchip?
What about the microchip? I mean, totally. This is why Bill Gates wants to track you. I got an email and an Instagram message from somebody the other day telling me what a fool I am for advocating for the vaccine, because this is what Bill Gates is up to. If you don't know that's happening, if you don't know that people are literally making the argument that they're changing your DNA so that it can be tracked by big data, that is an argument. Now, I know a lot of people who are not going to get the vaccine, a lot of people who said nope, and they don't know or believe any of that. They have their other reasons for not getting vaccines. But there's the hardy group of people that have access to email and Instagram status comments that do believe this. It's most certainly out there. So what we now know, it does actually stop the spread, because your body responds in a way that the virus doesn't put itself in your nasal passage, as far as I understand what the science is. And you can go down the rabbit hole of getting more, every article that I have read then links to a journal article, and then that journal article relates to a study. And the more deeper you get into following this, the more sophisticated one needs to be to understand that form of literature. It's not for the casual reader. Unlike
Not easy reading.
Unlike USA Today and the article that they put out yesterday that reminds us it's good. So I just want to ask of this: would you all please say to everyone you know, post it on your social media today, drop the note, mention it to a friend, say it to your family. Hey, did you hear they're now confident that the vaccine stops the spread? Get the vaccine and be confident that this virus can be stopped if we all respond with some kind of a vaccine. Please, 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 share the word. I beg of you. But I'm telling you, this anti-vaxxing thing, which the people that I personally know who are not interested in this vaccine, just in my own world, it's not because of what Donald Trump has said or not said. It's their own feelings about vaccines. And they're not even against all of them, some of these folks. they think kids should get them, but we should stretch them out and not do them all at the same time. But they're in the world that says vaccine. What we're being told by Big Pharma about vaccines is not accurate. This is what they're being told. And they just want to do a little more research. I've heard that over and over. And you know, sometimes I get concerned that when people say I'm doing my own research, that's code for I'm watching other websites and YouTube videos and listening to other podcasts. You're not doing your own research. Like, I don't think anybody's out there, you know, doing a little longitudinal study on the impact of vaccine. I think they're just saying, I'm going to read other material, watch other sources. And a lot of that is built around a notion that vaccines themselves are detrimental to humanity. It is.
And a lot of that goes back to a single study that was proven to be falsified, and the doctor that did it lost his license. But it doesn't matter because, like we were saying, that first initial thing to enter your head or enter the public awareness is so deeply lodged that vaccines could be dangerous to children or dangerous to your health. It doesn't matter that the science was falsified initially and science has continued to verify that vaccines are safe. It's that initial question mark just gets people saying, what if it's bad for me? What if it's bad for my kids?
We should do a whole science episode on vaccines because, well, yes, this 1998 study that came out that was wrong, this YouTube video called Vaxxed that a lot of people gain credit for. I will just say that from my own experience and a little bit of noodling around, the people I know that cite that study, look at that video, share it widely, the people that are part of the anti-vaxxer movement, they were suspicious of vaccines for a lot of other reasons and use that data as confirmation for their apprehension. It's been my experience. Very rarely was it somebody that's like, oh my gosh, no, I was totally for them. But then, you know, I saw this strangely made YouTube video and now I don't. There's something else that movement is tapping into something that people don't quite know how to get their heads around. I actually think it's more people believing that big pharmaceutical companies have no one's best interest in mind. And that's where it's coming from. Because almost always that conversation soon leads to people saying, you can't trust big pharma, big pharmaceutical. And
which is interesting because it's like, well, if we can't trust them, what if we regulate companies more tightly so that we know what they're doing? Well, we don't want to regulate. This is America. We need freedom and capitalism. Nice. The markets will decide if vaccines are safe.
Nice. Isn't that a curious confluence?
I also thought, not to go down this rabbit trail, but Biden's recent speech around COVID, one of the pushbacks he got was not praising Trump enough for getting the vaccine. And it's interesting that these are the same people that won't get the vaccine when it's available to them. So they want Trump to be praised for making the vaccine available that they will not get because of all these reasons.
You know, and this is one of those places. So this new poll came out that said that a percentage, 60% or something, or 40% or something of Republicans, identified Republicans, are not planning to get the vaccine. And like 50%, 49% of Republican men won't get it. So that other 60% of all Republicans or 50% of men, here's what's happening, I think. Those are the people, the ones who are going to get it, are saying, like, you should give Trump credit. And then the other half of the people are saying, I'm not getting it. So even within the Republican, the war that's happening inside the Republican Party, you start to see this split. So all Republicans aren't the same, right? So all of those of you that get the vaccine, consider voting for a Democrat next time too. I mean, and those of you that think you shouldn't, I don't know, get it and then consider maybe changing your political affiliation as well. But that's part of what I think is happening, is that the people chomping for Trump to get credit for Operation Warp Speed which was saying the federal government saying we're going to make sure that pharmaceutical companies can be supported, will be supported, and we reimbursed if they produce a vaccine. The people who are into the vaccine, half of them, 60%, they want the credit. The others don't want the vaccine, and this all gets clumped in together. So we kind of have to split out. And I think it's a good thing to like call them out. And if you have Republican friends, ask them, are you for the vaccine? Do you want, like, just start to engage this stuff and don't believe that every Republican is the same on this vaccine. This is one of the great places where we can find some common good around these, even though we differ politically. And let's not, because there are people who are all for Biden, 100%, very progressive liberals that I know who are not getting the vaccine. And there are people who are staunch Trumpites. I mean, they're still wearing the red hat and a Stop the Steal sign. And they're holding the Stop the Steal sign in one hand and getting a vaccine in the other arm. So this is not breaking like you might think. And it's easy because the polling is easy to say, are you Republican? What do you think of the vaccine? And these big numbers pop out. But that's not where all the problem lies. The problem lies in other places. So we just have to have these conversations across the board. And look, I hope we'll have it. I know there's people who watch this and listen to this who are not for vaccines. So tell me what you think. Write, email, podcast over at votecommongood.com, or if you know how to get a hold of me or Dan in other ways, do so. Dan, I just want to throw Jen's comment up here. She's in the live stream. Jen writes, and thank you, Jen, for writing. So if the virus doesn't go into your nasal passages, how would they test for it now? Great question. There could be more false negative tests then? That's a good question. The article does talk about this, and so does the study about what it means about it being the amount of it in your nasal passages. And apparently the difference between people who, like you'll hear about people who live in a family where one member of the family has the virus and is quite sick and nobody else gets it, right? And this is a confusing notion for a lot of people. Like, how's that happening? Well, apparently different people have different amounts of the virus that shows up in their nasal. You can get enough, if I understand this correctly, to get a positive test if you're sick with the virus, if you have the virus, but you don't have enough to be communicable, to spread it. It takes a particular amount, which is to come out of your body and go into somebody else's body, which is kind of gross when you just generally think about it. But this is why duration of time spent together and proximity they found is so important. That's why if you can sit for short periods of time with someone outdoors, unmasked, is different than sitting for long periods of time with them indoors, because it matters the amount. So that's the best I can understand about how that goes. So apparently still enough for a test to work at a nasal swab level, but not enough for transmission, if I understand and they understand this correctly and get enough out of it. Whew. All right. So
we're going to have to get more scientists on this show.
Sun, judicial demand for justice, the vaccine, and not to be outdone by an ongoing crisis at our southern border in the news today. The Biden administration is going to utilize FEMA to care for the teenagers and children who are crossing the border in record numbers. Now, this is a big thing. There's a lot of people who, including, me, I don't know where you are on this one, Dan, but I'm not totally happy with the way the Biden team has responded to our current immigration situation in the United States. Now, they're saying things that I know make sense to them, and this is what they want their messaging to be. They want their messaging to be, look, we inherited a broken system. We're doing everything we can to fix it. Okay, in your first 100 days, maybe I'll hold my breath on this about that. But at some point, you're going to have to pivot away from that response, because that starts to sound an awful lot like what I heard for 8 years from the Obama team about economics, which was, hey, there was a crisis. Well, yes, at some point, you have to respond to the broken system you were given. So I hope they do this. I hope they respond to it in a way. And the step toward using FEMA to do that is way better than using a criminal response team to do it, or the military. So you don't use ICE,
National Guard,
you don't use National Guard, you use the federal emergency response teams, the people whose job it is to bring humanitarian support to moments of crisis. You don't bring a military or criminal response. So people who say there's no difference between what the Trump administration did and what either Obama or what the Biden administration is now doing, I think you're missing this basic point. And that is Trump used family separation as a tactic to stop migration. And they used it to try to punish children and families who chose not to listen to the other messaging. Jeff Sessions literally said so when they passed their family separation policy. And
the zero tolerance policy. So this is a deterrent.
It's a deterrent. And then he quoted the Bible. Because I remember sitting in this very studio basement making an entire thing breaking down the speech given by Jeff Sessions where he quotes the book of Romans, chapter 12, you have to follow the laws set by your leaders. So he said any pain they feel is because they are not following God. It was unbelievable. That response, use family separation for punishment and deterrence. That is done. Our government is not doing that any longer. They're now trying to use response to a human crisis, that narrative. That's an enormous shift. Having said that, and you always know trouble's coming when someone uses a transition like, having said that, I will say now something not that. But having said that, you put a kid in a cage, you put a kid in an isolation unit, you put a kid in a windowless room for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days. I don't care what your intention is. Get the child out of there. Spend the money, invoke an executive order, do something. Because simply to say, well, our intention is to be different than this. We're not keeping children in this space because we want to deter them. We're keeping them here because we don't know what else to do with it. The child is suffering the same.
The child doesn't care what your intentions were.
Get them out of there. Now, this leads to a much larger conversation about immigration. And I am one of those open border people, by the way. So I used to try to caveat this and everything, but I've decided, you know what we should have? The presumption of openness at our border, and then the enforcement when people violate that openness. See, when I go to Mexico, the presumption is I can go into Mexico. I don't know if you've been to Mexico, Dan, but if you show up with a passport, they're glad to have you. In fact, they develop an entire infrastructure at the street level and at the airline and at the cruise ship level. They're ready for you. Glad to have you. Welcome to Mexico. Now, if you stay too long in Mexico, you violate your visa, then they enforce that. I believe that the stance of the United States government in Mexico should be what our stance is to our Canadian neighbors on the north, the presumption of openness. We have two different presumptions around our borders. And normally when someone, says something like, I'm for open borders, people are like, you can't have open borders. Okay, I sort of get it. But, like the border on the West Coast and the border on the East Coast and the border on the North Coast, they assume you can come in. There's whole countries, you don't even have to have a visa. You can just show up with your passport, fill out your form, who you are, where you're going to be, and come on in. In the South, we don't. We have a different expression of our immigration policy there. This is not even yet getting to should we change immigration quotas, because we have quotas for people who can legally immigrate or come to the United States and become citizens. Mm-hmm. Since the early 1900s, we've been saying this group can have this number, this group can have this number. Those numbers are ridiculous. They're outrageous. They make no sense, and we need to do away with them. But this isn't even getting to that. This is just saying if you get people's mindset to be, let's have a presumption of openness, and then we'll deal with the enforcement after that. The problem in our country on our southern border immigration is there is no line. If you try to get in line to become an accepted immigrant in the United States, it's not just that the line is long. There really isn't one. You can't even get on the list. It's a broken system over and over. And many of these kids are coming because they're declaring that they need some sort of asylum, not immigration. They need protection from a violent situation. So what people are doing is using one system, an asylum system, to try to get the attention of the U.S. government because the rest of the system is closed and there's no way to get on a list. So until we address that, and until religious people, especially evangelicals, get back to their 2008 roots on immigration and say, let's do comprehensive immigration reform that begins with a presumption of openness and then enforcement, we're not going to get anywhere, right? We need religiously motivated people to do this. So if you are one or no one, beg them to move on. And I saw Nancy Pelosi give a shout out to evangelicals on the news show This Week with George Stephanopoulos yesterday. She said, and I want to thank the evangelicals who met with us, and she was referring to the Evangelical Refugee Committee that said, this matters to us, and it's a humanitarian response, and the United States can be the crown jewel. And she was basically saying, I need the evangelicals now. Join us in getting immigration changed in this country. I have a whole other thought about the fact that I think we need to put 5 million more people in this country. Now, you might think 5 million people is too many. There are 328 million people in this country. You could put 5 million people in this country and not even feel it. If we were to increase population in certain parts of our country, rural America would see a resurgence. You could do this in ways that would just fuel all the goodness of America. So why we have taken in a shrinking society, a shrinking population, why we have taken an approach that says close that border and keep these quotas in place, there is not a rational response that I would agree with that would make any sense. That's my daily diatribe.
Because it's not rational. It's fear of people that don't look like us. Because you don't have that fear at the northern border of Canadians sneaking in and moving into your cities. It's always fear of those with darker skin moving into your neighborhoods and somehow changing the neighborhoods for the worse. And you hear this messaging all over Fox News. Tucker Carlson is always railing on it. Just thinly veiled racism. Like, this is going to change what America looks like. We can't let them change America. And it's very thinly veiled.
That's right.
They're just not even really trying to hide it anymore.
In fact, I watched the TV show this week, or last week tonight, with John Oliver.
Oh, yeah.
HBO show. And they did a segment on Tucker Carlson last night. If you can find it, dig it up. It's very well done when he makes the point that, well, Tucker Carlson might not agree that might not publicly agree that he's speaking the words of white supremacists, but the white supremacists say that he is, and it's all these clips of highly renowned white supremacists saying Tucker Carlson's doing our work for us. Here's what he does. You should sometimes those who endorse you and say thank you for the work you're doing for us, that ought to give you a clue about the fact that what you're doing is actually their bidding, or maybe better said, it's also your bidding. It's pretty clear and it's pretty evident. Having said that, there are a number of people who have followed the immigration process and somehow were able to get on that list, of which there is no line to get on the list. Other things cause you to get on the list. And they did immigrate into the United States. And often those people are also told that others should have to follow the line. And there's an economic disparity in Central American and Mexico and Central American countries and Mexico. So not every Mexican, Guatemalan, Honduran, El Salvadorian. I don't think there's very many Costa Ricans, but the wealthier you are, the greater chance you have to have immigration process work for you. The poorer you are, the more struggling you are, the less chance you have. In fact, the Trump administration even started to build that in. They're like, we need to vet you and make sure you're our right kind of people. Now, this is where people who are writing in the chat and other places say, hey, we need to have an ethic that is care for the least of these. We need to have that, and not let's just cherry pick the wealthy from other countries and allow them to come in. Our immigration process needs to be more right, more good, more common than that. That's a bad project. But there's a lot to think about around all of this, right? It's really complicated and sophisticated, and people are working diligently on it. And all of us have to get a little better about it. Now, the thing that's come up to me over and over on our Monday news conversations, whether it's, a roundup like this that we're doing or with a guest, it's just the recognition this stuff is hard. Like these thorny issues, criminal justice, stopping a pandemic, changing our clocks, immigration. These things are perennial problems because they're really hard to solve. Now, sometimes you can see clearly what the issue is. Sometimes you can lock in on where the problem lies. But after that, the solution, okay, that does actually get complicated. Now what do we do? How do we respond to those conditions in a different way? But that's why we need to organize to do hard work. That's why we need to do all parts of response to systems like this and to struggles like this, because you're not going to get answers to any of these only by taking the top line, most simple, quick response to any of these issues. And we have to deal with all of them at the same time, right? You don't get to set aside immigration for the pandemic. You're not going to set aside the need to understand our judicial system because we want to work on immigration. We don't have that option, and it would be a bad option if we did have it to take it. We have to deal with, talk about, engage in these issues simultaneously.
Because they're all intertwined.
They're all intertwined, and they're all happening right now, right? Like it's they all demand your attention right now. That's why we have a large, sophisticated federal, state, and county government system. For all the people who want us to shrink our government, what's fundamentally embedded in that is stop working on all these issues. Right? I mean, sure, there's whatever you have in your head about like that they spent $900 on a toilet in some military facility somewhere, and that's what you mean. Like you're going to get rid of waste and all that. Like, oh my goodness. Like our problem in our federal government isn't that we're wasting money. Our problem is we're not dealing with enough issues. We got to deal with more things, not try to squeeze out a little more efficiency.
Yeah, we're dealing with symptoms and not the root issues a lot of times. We're trying to put a Band-Aid on things, and we're not actually stopping the bleeding and addressing the systems that are causing all the injustice and all the turmoil and unfairness. So.
Yeah. And this has been going on and on and on. It's not like it snuck up on us, right? Our bad immigration policy. I mean, there was a period where the Irish were so restricted from coming in the U.S. The only reason that the quotas were changed was because there was a famine that was killing, the potato famine. Change the number of, because at one point people said, we don't want the Irish here. They're not Americans. They're committed to their Catholicism, which means that they're rooted to the Pope. This is in the 20th century. People were talking like this. You know why? Because the last thing we want is some Catholic Irish president. Yep, we got one. It's Joe Biden, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we've always had this adversarial approach to immigrants while also claiming to be this shining city on a hill that welcomes the tired, the poor, the teeming masses yearning to be free. We send these mixed messages, right? where it's like we're the greatest country on earth. Everyone should want to live here, but not you guys. You're not,
You
not
don't
until you
deserve the
make more
greatest.
money and have
Yeah.
earned it in some way.
Yeah, I was born here, so it's mine. You don't deserve
Yeah.
it because you walked here. I mean,
And the American dream of like pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, starting from nothing. All these incredible stories that we celebrate, but now we're like, well, if you're coming here with nothing in your pockets, that's different. That's not what my ancestors did. It's just this bizarre double standard.
Yes, it is. And having, bring up what we are, that look, this has been going on for a long time, is not to say that it's equal. Like darker skinned people and people from Africa and people from Central America and people from South America, they were also biased and bigoted against when the Irish and the Italians were. Now, we've shifted that feeling about the Irish and the Italians and Swedes and Norwegians, but we haven't shifted it about the other groups yet. So we still saying that we've had this bias against what we consider to be the outsider in the country that's made up of outsiders has existed, and we've solved for that in great part for some of the groups, but not for all. The fact that some have been solved for and not all shows that the thing that's keeping us from solving for all is likely the fact that we have a cultural bias against them that is rooted in some kind of racism. And the idea, and this is the fundamental crux of white supremacy, is that a certain kind of person that we would call white, that person has a value and a competency that surpasses people who are not. And I know that sounds severe, and people are like, no one thinks that. Yes, they do. And it comes out by saying, well, you come from a culture that doesn't understand this, or you do it like that, or your language is like this. And you ask yourself, well, why is your language not? Well, because I come from a culture that, and then you brag about it. So bragging about your own culture and down talking another, and when that's rooted in this notion that those who are more like us in skin tone and ethnic background, in other words, when the former president failed and twice impeached president said, why can't we have more people like from these states or these
Norway
countries?
or something. What did he say?
That's what he's getting at. Why don't we have the people that have the kind of work ethic like we have? You think he knows anything about how in Norway they're actually living in a place where they get government subsidy every month that comes from oil and is in what you call a democratic socialist system? No, he says that's something we don't want, but why can't we have more people like that? It's not for their political acumen. It was because he thinks those people know how to work. These other people who look different don't know how to work. Having said that, side note, the work ethic of people from Central and South America and Mexico should not be put in question. It is renowned. I promise you. That is not the problem. The problem isn't they don't know how to work hard. They don't know how to make a change. These are people that are literally come here walking with almost nothing, begging for a chance to not live under an oppressive, drug cartel-ridden circumstance and situation. So, hey, a lot to address. We hope you're about the common good with us around here. We like to raise these issues, and we're also going to work on them. All these things we're going to be working on. We have a whole project coming about white Christian nationalism in April. We're going to have a big effort on immigration. I guess we're going to cheer you on about vaccines. We're not doing much about that other than say do the right thing. And we're doing all that we can to communicate in all the spaces and all the places. So we really appreciate you being a part of all this. I'm just going to check. Dan, you want to say something finally? I'm just going to check the stream here and see if there's something that we want to pop up on the screen.
Boy, final thoughts. No, there's so much going on in the world and so much to care about. What I like about this show is we get to spend an hour every day highlighting some of these topics. And like on Tuesday, we go dive deep into politics. Wednesday, we've been diving deep into faith and theology and how that plays out in the world. And Thursday, we get to choose an issue and go deeper than the headlines, go deeper than the sound bites, and try to get a deeper perspective on it. We've covered abortion, we've covered immigration, we've covered COVID, and of course Fridays we dive into science. Like last week, we talked about the pandemic through the lens of complex systems, and we're able to get a perspective from a scientist who really knows what he's talking about, which I really enjoy. It's fun to just look at the headlines and kind of have our take on a scientific study that is hopeful, but to have someone that's been studying pandemics tell us there's a way out of this is also really encouraging.
Well said, Daniel. Well said. Hey, and thanks to all of you. So many comments on here. I can't get to all of them right now. They cluster together in what do you do for people who don't want to listen? Keep offering your gift. That's what I would say. You don't convince someone to listen. You say what you have to say and make it available for people to choose to listen to. And I know there are people who resist. Of course there are. People that go, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, and they just cover up and they don't want to hear anything, of course. But there's also an awful lot of people that don't have alternative narratives coming to them. We use this phrase, alternative facts. Some people, that's all they hear is one side of the argument. They only hear one thing. Don't give up on them. I mean, one of the great teachings of Jesus is don't give up on people. keep at 70 times 7 for forgiveness and 70 times 7 for offering them an alternative way to view the world. So don't give up. There are people in different stages of their life. They go through a time change and somehow they say, wow, I didn't think I would ever see it this way. I will. Maybe we'll do a whole episode where I'll just share messages that we've received here. They're little testimonials about this kind of, not just from the work that we're doing, but just overall. There is an entire movement of people who are like saying, wow, I just didn't think about that. I didn't know that. I really didn't know. So keep offering it. Of course, if someone doesn't want to hear it, don't be rude. But there's an awful lot of people who are looking to hear a little something more than what they're only hearing right now. So, Daniel, thank you. Good morning to you. Sorry for the loud clap. I'm sure you can cut that out of the podcast. And all the rest of you, we'll see you tomorrow when we talk politics straight up, like electoral stuff. So, happy day to you, and faith, hope, and love for a change, huh? See you later.